Several months have passed since my mother angel died, yet there are days when the grief feels like it's suffocating me. My love for her ran deep, despite how life seemed to consistently place me in the shadows while my sister Margaret commanded everyone's attention. I'm Rebecca, 27 years old, an artist who barely gets by through small painting jobs. Seeking the spotlight isn't in my nature. But I sometimes question whether this trait explains why Mom always appeared drawn to Margaret rather than me. Margaret appeared to possess everything: a spouse, a beautiful home, and the privilege of avoiding accountability for her actions. Mom cherished her, constantly defending her regardless of the circumstances, while I remained the one ensuring everything didn't completely collapse. Why must you always be so overly emotional, Rebecca? Margaret sneered one afternoon as I assisted Mom with packing her belongings for the move to the small dwelling on Margaret's land. She'd been unwell recently, and we decided it would be wise for her to reside closer to one of her daughters. It's not as though I'm sitting idle. I'm providing her with shelter, aren't I? She continued. I gritted my teeth, attempting to maintain my composure. She's our mother, Margaret, not some random person. And that shelter is a guest cottage you haven't utilized in years. Plus, she's paying you rent. You're not offering her charity. She rolled her eyes and folded her arms, positioning herself in the doorway. Do you realize how many individuals would desire an arrangement like this? She's fortunate to have me. Fortunate. The word escaped me like bitter laughter. You mean fortunate that I'm present, managing everything while you claim the recognition? Margaret simply shrugged and wandered toward her main house, leaving me standing there filled with both fury and incredulity. This pattern never changed, her contributing the absolute minimum while behaving as though she deserved sainthood for it. Later that evening, we received the test results. I contacted Margaret to inform her of the news. Margaret, the situation is severe, I said, my voice quivering. It's lymphoma. The physician estimates 6 months to 1 year. A pause followed on the other end before she finally replied, her tone frustratingly emotionless. Well, that's unfortunate, but at least she has her small home here. That counts for something, doesn't it? I blinked, tightening my grip on the phone. That's your entire response. That's unfortunate. She's dying, Margaret. Dying. What exactly do you expect me to do, Rebecca? She snapped back, abandon everything, and become her personal caregiver. I have my own life, you know. You could begin by demonstrating some basic human empathy. Perhaps accompany her to medical appointments occasionally, or spend genuine time with her. She let out a loud sigh. Listen, I'm contributing what I can. Let's not turn this into something about you, all right? I ended the call. After that, there was no use in continuing to argue. Margaret would invariably discover a method to reverse the situation and portray herself as the victim. After Mom became ill and began treatment, she grew too frail and exhausted to handle her personal financial matters. Since I was managing her daily care, Margaret had assumed control of her bank account and expenses. I wasn't thrilled with this arrangement, but Mom had faith in Margaret, so I allowed it. I hoped that perhaps this once Margaret would rise to the occasion and act responsibly. One afternoon, Mom requested that I verify her bank account balance. She'd been concerned about some forthcoming expenses and wanted to ensure she had sufficient funds. Rebecca, could you visit the bank for me? She asked, her voice weak but gentle. I simply want to confirm everything is in order. Of course, Mom, I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'll take care of it. I went to the bank that afternoon, still assuming everything would be acceptable, but when the teller presented me with the account statement, my heart plummeted. Her account was nearly depleted, the savings she had worked so diligently to accumulate after selling. Her vehicle gone. Then I noticed it. One enormous withdrawal made several weeks prior. The name on the transaction struck me like a physical blow. Margaret Bennett. I stared at the document, my hands trembling. There had to be some error. Margaret wouldn't know, she couldn't, but the proof was right there in front of me. I stepped outside the bank, the frigid air hitting my face like a slap, and immediately called Margaret. What's happening? She answered casually, as if we hadn't endured months of torment. Are you serious? I said, my voice shaking. Margaret, why on earth did you withdraw all of Mom's money? There was a pause before she responded, her tone becoming defensive. Rebecca.com yourself. It's not what you're thinking, not what I'm thinking. I snapped. Her account is empty, Margaret. Empty. And there's a transaction for the entire amount with your name attached to it? She sighed as though I was making an unreasonable fuss. It's a loan, okay? I needed the funds for some unexpected home repairs. I was planning to replace it within a few months. Mom doesn't even realize it's missing. It's not as if she requires it immediately. Alone. I nearly laughed, the bitterness choking me. You think you can simply take every last cent she has without asking her, without informing anyone. She's ill, Margaret. That money wasn't yours to claim. Don't be so theatrical, Rebecca, she said, her voice becoming sharp. I'll repay it. I always intended to. You're making this far more dramatic than necessary. You must be joking, I said, my voice low and trembling. Mom is dying, and you believe this is about me being dramatic. You're revolting, Margaret. I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady my voice. You have no comprehension of what you've done, do you? Mom asked me to check because she was worried about affording her groceries. Margaret, groceries. Do you understand how humiliating it will be for her when she discovers what you've done? She won't discover it, Margaret snapped, because you're not going to inform her. My stomach churned at the sheer audacity in her tone. Why wouldn't I? She deserves to know what you've done because it will only cause her stress. Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp and condescending. Do you truly believe she needs that right now? She's already dealing with enough. Besides, I'll return the money before she even notices. You're always acting as though I'm the villain here, Rebecca. But I'm trying to manage everything as best I can. Manage everything. I practically shouted, my anger boiling over. You mean dumping all the difficult parts on me while you play the perfect daughter? Don't you dare pretend you're the one making sacrifices. Rebecca, she hissed, her voice dropping. If you care about Mom, you'll let this go. She doesn't need to know about this. And you need to stop trying to make me the villain just because you can't stand that she trusted me with her finances. I hung up, unable to listen to another word. My chest felt constricted, my heart racing as I stood there on the sidewalk, watching cars pass by. Margaret was attempting to twist this into something noble, as if she was doing Mom some kind of favor by stealing from her. But what options did I have? Telling Mom would devastate her, and the thought of adding to her suffering made me feel sick. I needed to speak with someone, to vent, to make sense of the chaos brewing in my mind. Without hesitation, I called my best friend, Laura. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Rebecca, how are you?" she asked, her voice warm but slightly concerned. She could always detect when something was wrong. "It's Margaret," I said, my voice cracking. "I told her everything. The bank account, the withdrawal, the pathetic excuse Margaret had given me." By the time I finished, I could hear Laura's breathing had quickened. "She took everything?" Laura asked, disbelief evident in her voice, "and she expects you to just remain silent about it." "She claims it's a loan," I said bitterly, pacing around my small living room. "She's acting as though she's doing Mom a favor by not telling her." Laura didn't respond immediately, and when she did, her voice was low and firm. "Rebecca, you cannot allow her to get away with this. What if she doesn't repay it? Your mom needs that money. She's depending on you." "I know," I said, running a hand through my hair, "but if I tell Mom, it will crush her. And Margaret knows that. She's using it against me." "Of course she is," Laura said sharply. "She knows you're too kind to expose this, and she's taking advantage of that." "But Rebecca, someone has to hold her accountable." I sighed heavily, sinking into the couch. "I don't even know how." "Margaret doesn't listen to me. She never has. And George, her husband, is always so full of himself." I stopped myself, but Laura jumped in. "George knows about this, doesn't he?" she asked. "He has to." "Probably," I admitted. "He's just as bad as she is, always supporting her regardless of the situation. You should have seen how smug they were when Mom moved into that guest house, acting like they were saints for allowing her to live there." "You're not alone in this," Laura said gently. "I'll help however I can." "But, Rebecca, you need to stand your ground." Her words gave me a small spark of strength, but I still felt trapped. I couldn't tell Mom. I couldn't confront Margaret without it escalating into a full-scale war. But I couldn't just sit there and let her walk all over us. The following days were excruciating. I couldn't remove the thought of Margaret's betrayal from my mind. Every time I saw Mom, it felt like a heavy burden pressing down on my chest. She'd smile at me, thank me for helping her with dinner or sitting with her during treatments, completely unaware of what Margaret had done. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Every time I opened my mouth, the words became stuck in my throat, but Margaret didn't make it easy to let things go. A few days later, I was at Mom's house helping her organize her medical bills when Margaret strolled in like she owned the place. George was with her, carrying a few grocery bags that he dropped on the counter without so much as a word to either of us. "Look at this," Margaret said, holding up a small bouquet of flowers she'd clearly just purchased from the store. "I thought these might brighten up the place. Don't you think?" "Oh, Margaret, that's so considerate," Mom said, her face lighting up. I bit my tongue so hard I thought I might draw blood. "Considerate? She emptied your bank account, Mom." But instead, I just nodded stiffly, pretending to focus on the papers. In front of me, George caught my expression and smirked. You should learn a thing or two from Margaret, Rebecca. She's always thinking of others. It was the final straw. I slammed the papers down on the table and stood up. Thinking of others. Are you serious? My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. Rebecca! Rebecca! Mom said softly, looking startled. What's wrong? Nothing, I muttered, forcing myself to calm down. I just remembered something I need to take care of. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, unable to stay in the same room as Margaret and George for another second. As I walked out, heard Margaret's voice behind me, low and mocking. She's always so dramatic. The next day, I needed to clear my head, so I decided to run a few errands in town. I was walking down Main Street, juggling a grocery list in my head, when I saw her, Margaret, stepping out of one of the most expensive boutiques in town, laughing and chatting with a sales assistant as George held the door open for her. She had at least 3 shopping bags in her hands, each decorated with the store's logo. I froze mid-step, my stomach churning. There she was, spending who knows how much money on clothes and whatever else, while Mom was budgeting for groceries. The image of Margaret's name on that withdrawal slip flashed in my mind, and my hands clenched into fists. Without thinking, I marched straight up to her. Margaret, I called, my voice sharp and loud enough to make her flinch. She turned, her smile fading as she saw me. Oh, Rebecca, she said, her tone sneering and fake. What a surprise! Out shopping too! Shopping, I hissed, glaring at the bags in her hands. What are you even doing here? Spending more of Mom's money. Her face tightened, but she quickly recovered, flashing a tight smile. Don't be ridiculous. This is my money. George and I work hard, Rebecca. Not that you'd understand. George snorted beside her, clearly amused by her jab. Careful, Rebecca, he said smugly. Jealousy doesn't suit you. Jealous. I laughed bitterly. No, Margaret. I'm not jealous. I'm disgusted. You drained Mom's account, and now you're out here buying designer clothes like nothing happened. How do you sleep at night? Margaret's expression hardened. She stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. I told you, it's a loan, and if you care about Mom, you'll drop it. Do you want her to know about this? To worry about something she doesn't need to? I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger. You're unbelievable. Mom deserves to know the truth. She deserves better than you. Margaret leaned in closer, her voice dripping with venom. You tell her, and you'll break her heart. She's already sick, Rebecca. Do you really want to be the reason she gets worse? Think about that before you open your mouth. As I stood there, fuming at Margaret's audacity, a wave of memories hit me. This wasn't the first time Margaret had pulled something like this, and deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last. Mom, bless her heart, had always been Margaret's biggest supporter, no matter how awful her behavior was. When we were kids, Margaret had a talent for pushing every boundary. She'd take money from Mom's purse for things she wanted, concert tickets or new shoes. Mom would find out eventually, of course, but she'd just shake her head and say, "Oh, Margaret, you should have just asked." And that was it. No punishment, no accountability, just forgiveness on a silver platter. Even as we got older, nothing changed. Margaret always had an excuse, always a sob story to back her actions. There was the time she borrowed Mom's car without permission and crashed it. She cried and blamed a pothole, and somehow Mom ended up comforting her, saying, "Cars can be fixed, but you can't replace family." I remember sitting there, stunned, while Margaret smiled through her crocodile tears. Mom had a heart too big for her own good. She always believed the best in people, especially in Margaret. "She's your sister, Rebecca," Mom would say. Whenever I tried to bring up Margaret's behavior, "She's not perfect, but she means well." I hated that phrase. "She means well." It was Mom's way of justifying everything Margaret did, from lying to taking advantage of her kindness. But this time was different. This wasn't a harmless mistake or a moment of bad judgment. This was calculated, cruel, and completely unforgivable. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that if Mom knew, she'd find a way to forgive her anyway. That was who Mom was, a sweet, selfless person who couldn't see the bad in the people she loved. Margaret and George had always measured people by one thing: money. To them, a person's worth was directly tied to their bank account. If you weren't wealthy, you simply didn't matter. I'd seen them brush off neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives who didn't fit their idea of successful. There was this one time when Mom invited Mrs. Hathaway, an elderly widow from down the street, over for tea. She'd been a kind woman, always bringing baked goods and little gifts for Mom. But when Margaret and George stopped by and saw her sitting there in her worn-out cardigan, Margaret barely acknowledged her presence. George didn't even bother hiding his disdain. Later, Margaret pulled me aside and said, "Why does Mom even talk to people like that? What can they possibly offer her?" It was sickening. And the irony of it all, their own so-called success was as fragile as glass. Beneath the surface, George and Margaret were drowning in debt. They'd been borrowing money from the bank for years, refinancing their home, maxing out credit cards, whatever it took to keep up appearances. Margaret once let it slip to me after a few too many glasses of wine that they were stretched thin, but she quickly laughed it off, saying, "It's just temporary. George's investments will pay off soon." But they never did. That's the thing about people like Margaret and George. They live for the image, the illusion of wealth, even when it's built on lies. Their fancy cars, their designer clothes, their perfectly manicured lawn, it was all for show. And now, seeing Margaret use Mom's money to keep that illusion alive made me feel sick to my stomach. Mom, who had worked so hard to save every penny after selling her car, deserved so much better than to have her sacrifices thrown away on Margaret's shallow lifestyle. Mom's decline was gradual at first. Small things like losing her appetite or needing more rest. But as the months went by, it became harder to ignore. Her energy faded, her voice grew weaker, and some days it was like the vibrant woman I'd always known was slipping away right before my eyes. I tried to be strong for her, but the weight of everything, taking care of her, managing my own life, and the constant frustration with Margaret was becoming unbearable. One day, after another tense encounter with Margaret, Laura suggested I try something to clear my head. "Rebecca, you're burning out," she said gently. "You're doing everything for everyone, and it's not sustainable. Take a couple of hours for yourself. Go to that yoga class you've been talking about." I hesitated, but finally agreed. Mom was having a quiet day, and Margaret was supposed to be around, so I thought just this once I could step away. I left my phone on silent in my bag, telling myself it would only be for a little while. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, even if it was just for an hour or two. When the class ended, I grabbed my phone and saw the missed calls, 6 from Margaret. My stomach dropped as I fumbled to unlock the screen. Her last voicemail made my blood run cold. "Rebecca, it's Mom," Margaret's voice said, trembling but sharp. "She's gone. I don't know where you were, but you should have been here." I don't even remember how I got home. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled into the house where Margaret was sitting on the couch, her face red and blotchy. She just stopped breathing. She said, looking up at me, "I was here, but there was nothing I could do. I couldn't speak." My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I'd been gone for 2 hours. 2 hours. And I hadn't been there to say goodbye. Mom had died at home in the little guest house she'd moved into with Margaret by her side. The guilt hit me like a freight train. "You should have been here," Margaret said, her voice cold now. "I don't know why you thought yoga was more important than Mom. She needed you, Rebecca." Her words sliced through me. I wanted to scream, to tell her that she had no right to judge me. Not after everything she'd done, but I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, tears streaming down my face as the weight of losing Mom settled in. The day of Mom's funeral was cold and gray, the kind of weather that seeped into your bones. Mom had been deeply religious, so it was only fitting that the service was held at her beloved church. The stained glass windows cast soft colors onto the pews as the organ played a somber melody. I sat near the front, clutching a tissue in one hand and a picture of Mom in the other. My heart was heavy, not just with grief, but with the weight of everything that had happened. Margaret and George arrived late, of course, sweeping into the church as if it were a fashion show. Margaret was dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, her neck adorned with a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my monthly rent. George, in an expensive-looking suit, walked beside her, carrying an air of smug self-importance. The way they moved, it was like they thought the funeral was about them, not Mom Dot. As they made their way to the front, I caught the whispers. People were glancing at me with judgment in their eyes, leaning toward each other to murmur behind their hands. My stomach twisted, and I tried to focus on the picture of Mom in my lap, but it was impossible not to hear. Rebecca wasn't even there when Angel passed. One voice whispered. Margaret said she was off doing yoga. Another added, the disdain dripping from their words. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Margaret had made sure to plant that seed in everyone's mind. She wanted them to see me as the selfish daughter, the one who abandoned Mom when she needed me most. And judging by the looks I was getting, it had worked. Margaret slid into the pew next to me, flashing me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You okay, Rebecca?" she whispered, her tone dripping with false concern. "I know it must be hard, knowing you weren't there for her." I stared straight ahead, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. The priest began to speak, his voice filling the church as he talked about Mom's kindness, her unwavering faith, and her love for her Family? I felt tears sting my eyes as he mentioned how devoted she had been to her daughters. If only he knew the truth. As the priest continued his eulogy, his voice grew softer, more intimate, as if he were speaking directly to each of us. Angel was a remarkable woman, he said, glancing at the congregation. She loved deeply, forgave endlessly, and carried a quiet strength that inspired those around her. In my final visit with her, just days before her passing, she entrusted me with something very personal. A letter. A murmur rippled through the church. My breath hitched. A letter. I glanced at Margaret, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. George furrowed his brow, looking confused, but not concerned. I, on the other hand, felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread. She asked me to read it today, the priest continued, holding up a sealed envelope. It was her final wish, and she made me promise that I would share her words with all of you. The church fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop as he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. The anticipation was unbearable. My heart pounded as the priest adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. To everyone gathered here today, he began, his voice steady. I want to thank you for coming to celebrate my life. I lived a life of love and faith, and though it was not without challenges, I leave this world with gratitude in my heart. However, there is something I must say before I rest, something that weighs heavily on me and must be brought into the light. I froze. I could feel the tension in the room as everyone leaned in, waiting for what came next. I have always believed in forgiveness, the priest read, his tone solemn. But forgiveness does not erase the truth. And the truth is, in my final months, I experienced a betrayal so painful that it nearly broke me. Margaret, my eldest daughter, I trusted you with everything, my care, my home, my finances, but you took advantage of that trust in ways that no mother should ever endure. Gasps echoed through the church. Margaret's face went pale, and she shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. George's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, his eyes darting toward the priest. You took the money I had saved from selling my car, money I had set aside for my care, for emergencies. Rebecca, who gave so much of herself to ensure I was never alone. I know that you knew about this, but decided to protect me so that I wouldn't suffer in my final months. God bless you for being such a wonderful child. The priest continued, Margaret, you drained my bank account and what was left of my energy, leaving me with nothing. I knew, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to shame you or cause more pain in my final days. But people need to know who you are. My hands flew to my mouth as tears streamed down my face. She knew. All this time, Mom knew. The guilt, the fear of breaking her heart. It had been for nothing. She had carried that pain herself, silently. The priest's words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. The silence in the church was deafening. All eyes turned to Margaret, who sat frozen, her face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. George shifted uncomfortably beside her, his usual smugness replaced with unease. No one said a word, but the weight of judgment in the room was palpable. I didn't move. My tears were flowing freely now, but they weren't just for Mom. They were for the truth she had carried alone, for the strength it must have taken to leave this world with grace despite everything Margaret had done. My chest ached with a mix of grief, relief, and rage. Margaret finally broke the silence. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. She was sick, probably confused. I did everything for her. Everything. And this is how she repays me. People around her started to whisper, their faces filled with shock and disdain. George grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but she yanked it away. "You don't know what it's like," she continued, her voice louder now, almost desperate. "I was under so much pressure. I needed that money for the house. For both of us. That's enough, Margaret," the priest said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is not the time to justify your actions. Your mother's words speak for themselves." Margaret glared at him, then at me, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and humiliation. "I hope you're happy," she spat before storming out of the church, George trailing awkwardly behind her. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut echoed through the sanctuary. I sat there, stunned, as people began to murmur around me. Some whispered words of sympathy, while others exchanged looks that said everything they thought about Margaret's outburst. Laura, who had been sitting a few rows behind me, came up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca," she said softly, her voice steady, "your mom saw you for who you are. She knew you were the one who stood by her, no matter what." I nodded, my throat tight. Mom's letter had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I had spent so much time protecting her, trying to shield her from the truth, and yet she had known all along. And even in her final days, she had chosen to protect me instead. As the service ended and people began to file out, many stopped to offer me condolences, their words laced with a newfound respect. Margaret's mask had finally slipped, and the truth was out. I wasn't sure what would happen next for her, for George, or for me. But one thing was certain, Mom's voice, even in death, had given me a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, I looked at the picture of Mom I had taken from the service. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching it close to my chest. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. Mom's love had been bigger than Margaret's betrayal, and in the end, that love was all I needed to carry me forward.